5. Before tonight's peaceful journey truly begins, take a slow, comfortable breath. If you enjoy these quiet walks through forgotten history, consider subscribing to Moonlit Sleep Stories, where each evening invites you into another gentle world from long ago. Now, settle into your favorite cozy place. Let the noise of today drift farther away, and together we'll step into a medieval castle before the rest of the world has awakened. Tonight, dear friend, we travel back in time. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 13th century. England is a land of rolling green hills, quiet forests, winding rivers, and sturdy stone castles that watch patiently over the countryside. Long before clocks hang upon walls or church bells announce the busy hours of the day, people already understand time by the changing stars, the fading moon, and the first pale colors gathering beyond the eastern horizon. Our destination is not the Lord's great hall, nor the castle chapel, nor the high tower where guards quietly watch the sleeping valley below. Instead, we are making our way toward the warm heart of the entire castle, its great kitchen. Although nearly everyone inside the castle still sleeps beneath thick wool blankets, a handful of ordinary people are already beginning another peaceful day of honest work. They are not famous. Their names have long disappeared from history. Yet every loaf of bread served, every bowl of comforting pottage, every feast prepared for noble guests depended upon their patient hands. A cool breeze brushes gently across your face as you follow the narrow road climbing toward the castle gate. The sky remains a deep shade of blue, though the brightest stars have begun to fade. High above, a thin silver moon slowly slips toward the western hills, quietly surrendering the night to another morning. The castle rises before you like a peaceful mountain of stone. Its thick limestone walls glow faintly beneath the moonlight. Round towers stand silently at each corner, their dark silhouettes reaching into the quiet sky. Wooden hoardings project from the upper walls, while narrow arrow slits appear almost like sleeping eyes watching over the land. Nothing feels threatening. At this early hour, even such an enormous fortress seems calm and welcoming. A pair of guards stand beside the heavy oak gate. Wrapped in thick wool cloaks against the cool morning air, they lean comfortably upon their long spears. One quietly nods as another suppresses a gentle yawn. Their night has been peaceful. Beyond them, the castle courtyard rests almost completely silent. A stable boy quietly carries a wooden bucket toward the horses. One of the castle dogs stretches lazily before curling once again beside a wagon wheel. A few chickens wander slowly across the packed earth, searching patiently for scattered grains left behind the evening before. The smell of damp stone mixes softly with cool morning air. Somewhere nearby, fresh hay carries its sweet, earthy fragrance from inside the stables. Farther away comes the faint scent of oak smoke. Someone has already begun lighting one of the morning fires. You continue across the courtyard. Your footsteps echo gently against ancient stone walls, polished smooth by countless generations of passing feet. Small pools of yesterday's rain still rest between uneven cobblestones, quietly reflecting the fading stars overhead. The castle itself seems almost alive, not because it moves, but because every doorway, every window, every stair has witnessed centuries of ordinary life unfolding within its walls. Soon you notice a building unlike the grand hall or noble chambers. Its chimney rises higher than most others. Even before reaching its doorway, the comforting aroma of smoldering oak wood becomes stronger. This is the great kitchen. Already, faint orange light flickers beneath the heavy wooden door. Someone has arrived before us. The thick oak door opens with a slow, familiar creak. Warm air immediately greets you, carrying the rich scent of burning wood, old stone, dried herbs, fresh flour, and yesterday's baked bread. After the cool darkness outside, the warmth feels wonderfully comforting. Inside stretches one of the busiest rooms in the entire castle, yet for now it remains beautifully quiet. The enormous stone fireplace dominates the far wall. It is taller than several people standing together, large enough to roast whole animals above glowing embers during grand feasts. At this peaceful hour, only a modest fire burns inside. Orange flames gently dance around carefully stacked oak logs. The fire crackles softly, sending tiny sparks upward before disappearing into the great stone chimney high above. Its warmth slowly spreads throughout the vast room. Long oak tables fill the center of the kitchen. Their thick surfaces carry the marks of countless years of chopping vegetables, kneading bread, preparing herbs, and shaping pies. No two scratches tell the same story. Each one remembers another ordinary meal prepared with care. Along one wall stand enormous copper cauldrons polished until they glow warmly beneath the firelight. Nearby hang rows of iron ladles, roasting forks, knives, and wooden stirring paddles, each resting neatly upon handcrafted wooden pegs. Nothing appears wasted. Everything has its proper place. Beneath a nearby window, woven willow baskets overflow with onions, carrots, turnips, leeks, cabbage, and fragrant bundles of thyme, parsley, sage, and rosemary gathered from the castle gardens only yesterday. Their fresh, earthy scent quietly fills the room. A gentle scraping sound draws your attention toward the fireplace. An elderly man kneels beside the hearth. His name has long vanished from written history, yet this morning he becomes our quiet guide. He serves as the castle's master cook. His gray hair disappears beneath a neatly tied white linen coif. A heavy wool tunic, faded from years beside the fire, hangs comfortably beneath a thick linen apron dusted lightly with flour. His hands are broad, weathered, and strong. Years of lifting heavy pots, kneading bread, chopping vegetables, and tending roaring fires have left their quiet marks upon his skin. Yet every movement remains slow, careful, and wonderfully practiced. He places another split oak log upon the glowing embers. The fire responds with a soft sigh before growing slightly brighter. For a few peaceful moments, he simply watches the flames, not because he has nothing to do, but because a good fire cannot be hurried. Like bread, it requires patience. Like soup, it develops slowly. Like history itself, the finest things often unfold one quiet moment at a time. He reaches toward an iron kettle hanging above the fire. The water inside has only just begun to warm. Soon it will provide hot water for morning porridge, fresh bread dough, and countless small tasks that quietly sustain everyone living inside the castle. Without this single fire, hundreds of people would greet the day hungry. The master cook glances toward the still dark doorway. Before long, more footsteps will arrive. Young apprentices, bread bakers, scullions carrying heavy buckets, kitchen maids washing vegetables, water bearers returning from the well. Each person will bring another small piece of life into this peaceful room. But for now, there is only the gentle crackling of oak logs, the comforting fragrance of fresh herbs, the warm glow of firelight dancing across ancient stone walls, and the quiet promise that somewhere beyond these thick castle walls, another beautiful medieval morning is slowly beginning. Outside, the eastern sky had begun to soften from deep navy into gentle shades of blue and pale silver. The stars quietly surrendered one by one, while a cool mist drifted across the castle courtyard below. Somewhere beyond the walls, a blackbird offered the first cautious notes of a new day. Inside the great kitchen, the warmth of the fire continued to grow. The elderly master cook remained beside the vast stone hearth, listening as dry oak logs settled with gentle cracks and sighs. Fire was never something to command, it was something to understand. Too much heat would scorch bread before its center baked. Too little would leave the morning meal unfinished long after hungry workers had begun their day. He reached for a long iron poker and carefully adjusted the glowing embers. Tiny sparks floated upward like golden fireflies before disappearing into the great chimney. The room filled with a comforting blend of warm stone, fresh ash, oak smoke, and herbs hanging from the heavy ceiling beams. Then, footsteps. Soft at first, almost hesitant. The heavy wooden door opened just enough for a young boy to step inside, carefully balancing 2 wooden buckets filled with fresh water drawn from the castle well. He could not have been older than 13. His simple brown wool tunic had already become damp around the sleeves from the cold morning air. A coarse rope served as his belt, while sturdy leather shoes carried traces of wet earth from the courtyard. He quietly placed the buckets beside the hearth. The master cook looked toward him with a small smile. "Good morning," the boy answered with a respectful nod. "Good morning, master." No long conversation followed. There was no need. Both understood the quiet rhythm that guided each new day. Soon another figure entered. This time it was an older woman carrying a wide woven basket resting comfortably against her hip. Inside lay fresh eggs gathered before sunrise. Some were pale cream, others carried soft shades of brown. A few still held tiny feathers clinging gently to their shells. The woman removed her wool cloak and hung it beside the doorway. Cold morning air followed her only for a moment before the heavy door closed once again. She breathed deeply. "There is nothing like the smell of the kitchen before everyone arrives," she said softly. The master cook chuckled. "It always smells like possibility." She laughed quietly. "I was going to say fresh bread." Both answers seemed equally true. Nearby, another apprentice carefully untied bundles of herbs collected the previous afternoon. Rosemary, sage, parsley, thyme. Their fragrance spread gently through the room as each bundle found its proper place upon the long wooden table. Nothing inside the kitchen happened by accident. Every knife, every spoon, every basket, every clay pot, every handful of flour, everything belonged exactly where years of habit expected it to be. That quiet order allowed dozens of people to work together without confusion once the busy hours began. The first task of every morning was not cooking. It was preparation. Preparation made everything else possible. Water had to be carried. Wood had to be stacked. Ash from yesterday's fires needed removing. Fresh vegetables required washing. Flour sacks were inspected. Bread dough had to begin rising while the air remained cool. The great kitchen woke slowly, almost like the castle itself stretching after a peaceful night's sleep. Outside, another cart rolled across the cobblestones. Its wooden wheels creaked softly beneath the weight of freshly milled flour arriving from the nearby village. 2 millers' sons carefully unloaded heavy linen sacks marked with the miller's simple woven seal. Fine white flour was precious. Most bread prepared for servants and workers would be darker, made from barley or rye. The finest wheat flour was reserved for the Lord's table and honored guests. Even bread quietly reflected the careful order of medieval society. Yet no matter its color, every loaf required the same patience. One of the younger apprentices loosened the drawstring of a flour sack. A small white cloud drifted gently into the air before settling upon the table like fresh winter snow. He smiled without realizing it. The master cook noticed. "Flour always finds its way onto your nose." The boy quickly brushed at his face. The older woman laughed warmly. "You missed a spot." Soon everyone in the kitchen shared a quiet laugh that echoed softly among the stone walls. Moments like these rarely appeared in official histories. No king recorded them. No monk carefully copied them into illuminated manuscripts. Yet they happened, again and again. morning after morning, year after year. History often remembers great battles, but ordinary happiness leaves gentler footprints. As daylight slowly strengthened, more workers entered through the heavy oak door. A baker with broad shoulders carried smooth wooden kneading boards beneath one arm. A young girl brought bundles of clean linen cloth. An older servant rolled a barrel of fresh ale toward the pantry. 2 scullions began polishing yesterday's copper pots until they reflected the growing firelight like pools of liquid gold. No one hurried. There was work to do, much work. But experience had taught them that rushing rarely saved time. Instead, calm hands produced better bread. Careful eyes prevented mistakes. Patient workers created peaceful kitchens. The castle had not yet fully awakened, but its heart already beat steadily. One quiet task after another. One loaf, one basket, one kettle, one gentle beginning to another ordinary medieval day. The first rays of sunlight had not yet reached the castle courtyard, but inside the kitchen, another corner of the room was quietly awakening. Near the far wall stood the bakery. Unlike the great fireplace that warmed the entire kitchen, the bread oven had its own steady purpose. Built from thick stone and carefully shaped brick, it held heat long after the flames themselves had faded. Generations of bakers had trusted its patient warmth, and this morning would be no different. The castle baker arrived carrying nothing more than a simple linen cloth draped over one shoulder and a wooden bowl tucked beneath his arm. He was a broad-shouldered man nearing 50, his beard touched with threads of gray that caught the firelight like silver. His movements were unhurried, almost graceful, as though every loaf he had ever baked had quietly taught him another lesson in patience. Without speaking, he rested his bowl upon the heavy oak table. Inside waited yesterday's sourdough starter. It was alive. Tiny bubbles covered its creamy surface, carrying the faint, pleasant scent of fermented grain. To the people of the castle, this humble mixture was almost as valuable as flour itself, for it allowed bread to rise gently without the need for anything more complicated than time. The baker smiled. "It slept well," he whispered almost to himself. One of the younger apprentices stepped closer, curious as always. "How can you tell?" The older man dipped one finger lightly into the starter before lifting it into the warm air. "It smells healthy," he answered softly. "It breathes." The boy leaned closer. To him, it smelled slightly sour, warm, comforting, not unpleasant at all. The baker nodded. "Good bread begins long before anyone tastes it." Those simple words lingered in the quiet kitchen. Nearby, 2 apprentices carefully poured freshly milled flour into a broad wooden trough polished smooth by decades of daily use. Fine white flour drifted gently downward like soft morning snow. Soon darker rye flour joined it, then barley. Each grain had traveled its own quiet journey, from golden fields waving beneath summer sunshine, through the patient turning of the village mill, until finally arriving here inside the castle kitchen. Nothing happened quickly. Every loaf carried the work of countless hands. Farmers, millers, carters, servants, bakers. Even the forests had contributed, offering the oak logs that now glowed inside the great oven. The baker poured warm water into the flour. Next came a small handful of coarse salt. Finally, he added the lively starter. At first, the mixture appeared untidy. Dry flour clung stubbornly to the edges, while small rivers of water disappeared beneath pale clouds of grain. Then his strong hands began their quiet work. Fold, press, turn, stretch, again and again. Each movement followed a rhythm learned over many years. The dough slowly transformed beneath his fingers. What had begun as scattered ingredients gradually became one smooth, living mass. The apprentices watched carefully, One finally asked the question resting in every beginner's mind. "Master, how do you know when it's ready?" The baker smiled without looking up. "You stop watching the clock." The boy blinked. "We don't have one." "Exactly." The older man chuckled gently. "You learn to listen instead. Listen to the dough, to the warmth of the room, to the feel beneath your hands, to the quiet pace of the morning. History often imagines medieval life as hurried survival. Yet here, inside the bakery, almost everything depended upon slowing down. Dough refused to be rushed. Fire ignored impatience. Bread rose only when it was ready. As the first batch rested beneath clean linen cloths, another apprentice carried baskets toward the pantry. Inside lay onions with crisp golden skins. Bundles of leeks still carried drops of dew gathered before sunrise. Round cabbages rested beside earthy turnips and freshly dug carrots. Nothing looked perfect. Some vegetables were twisted, others uneven. A few still carried traces of dark soil. Yet together they promised nourishing meals for hundreds of people before the day was done. Near one window, an elderly kitchen maid carefully sorted herbs into neat bundles. Parsley for soups, sage for roasted meats, thyme for pottage, mint for cooling summer drinks. Each fragrance drifted gently through the warm kitchen air, blending with flour, oak smoke, and fresh bread until the entire room seemed wrapped in quiet comfort. Outside, the castle itself was beginning to stir. A distant bell rang softly. Stable doors creaked open. Somewhere across the courtyard, horses stamped their hooves against the cool morning ground. The village beyond the castle walls would soon awaken as well. But here inside the kitchen, time still moved at its own gentle pace. The baker carefully uncovered the resting dough. Already it had begun to change. Its surface looked softer now, lighter, almost breathing beneath the linen. He divided it into round portions with a simple wooden scraper. Each loaf was shaped by hand. No two were perfectly alike, and somehow that made them even more beautiful. He placed them upon broad wooden peels dusted lightly with flour. Nearby, the great stone oven had reached exactly the warmth he desired. Not blazing, not weak, simply ready. With practiced hands, he slid the first loaves into the darkness of the oven. For a brief moment, only silence remained. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait. And in medieval kitchens, waiting was never wasted time. It was simply another quiet part of the craft. The heavy stone oven quietly held its warmth as the first loaves of bread rested inside. Nothing could hurry them now. The baker brushed a light dusting of flour from his hands and stepped back. For a few peaceful moments, he simply listened. Bread often spoke in quiet ways. The gentle crackle of the oven, the soft sigh of expanding dough, the faint scent that slowly drifted into the room. These were signs no written recipe could fully teach. Around him, the great kitchen continued its calm rhythm. One apprentice carried another armful of dry oak logs toward the fireplace, stacking them neatly beside the hearth. Each piece of wood had been cut months earlier and left to season beneath a covered shed. Dry wood burned steadily, producing a clean, dependable heat without filling the kitchen with heavy smoke. The master cook often reminded his apprentices that good firewood was as important as good flour. Without one, the other could never reach its full purpose. Near the washing table, 2 kitchen maids lowered bundles of freshly gathered vegetables into cool water drawn from the castle well. Bright green leeks floated gently beside thick orange carrots. Round turnips rolled slowly across the bottom of the wooden basin. Leaves of cabbage shimmered beneath the clear water before tiny droplets slipped quietly back into the tub. The young maid smiled as she watched small circles spread across the surface. "There is something peaceful about washing vegetables," she whispered, Her older companion nodded. It gives your hands time to think. Outside the narrow window, dawn continued unfolding across the valley. Morning mist drifted lazily above nearby fields where farmers would soon begin another day's work. Beyond the castle walls, the village remained quiet, though thin streams of smoke had begun rising from scattered cottages as families prepared their own simple breakfasts. Inside the castle, however, breakfast meant feeding hundreds. Servants, guards, stable hands, craftsmen, messengers, visitors, children, and, of course, the noble household. Every meal required careful planning long before the first bowl reached the table. The master cook unfolded a piece of smooth parchment. Unlike royal documents covered with elegant writing, this simple list contained only practical notes. How much bread remained, how many barrels of ale had been opened, which vegetables needed using first, what herbs had been harvested yesterday. The list changed almost every day, not because life was uncertain, but because the seasons never stood still. Spring offered tender greens, summer brought fragrant herbs and fresh berries. Autumn filled the pantry with apples, onions, beans, and pumpkins. Winter demanded careful use of salted meats, dried peas, oats, and root vegetables stored safely beneath cool stone floors. The kitchen followed nature more closely than any calendar. Near one corner of the room, an elderly woman carefully opened a heavy oak chest. Inside rested the castle's precious collection of spices. Not many, only a few carefully wrapped cloth bundles. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. Each had traveled astonishing distances across seas, deserts, and mountain roads before finally arriving inside this quiet English castle. The younger apprentice looked inside with wide eyes. "They smell like another world." "They are," the woman replied gently. "Some of these traveled farther than most people ever will." She carefully returned each bundle to its proper place. Such spices were valuable enough to be measured with great care. Most of today's cooking would rely instead upon local herbs gathered from the castle gardens. Parsley, sage, thyme, rosemary, simple flavors, honest flavors, the kind ordinary people knew well. Near the fireplace, a large iron cauldron had begun its own slow work. Clear water shimmered softly above the flames. Soon chopped onions slipped gently into the pot, then sliced leeks. Carrots followed. Turnips, a handful of barley, fresh parsley. The master cook stirred everything with a paddle nearly as tall as a young apprentice. The wooden spoon moved slowly through the growing pottage, round and round, never hurried. The pleasant aroma spread almost immediately. Warm vegetables, fresh herbs, oak smoke, slowly cooking grain. The fragrance filled every corner of the kitchen with quiet comfort. One apprentice closed his eyes for just a moment. "My grandmother's cottage smelled like this." The master cook smiled. "Then you're home." No one laughed. The words felt true. Many servants had lived within these walls for years. Some had arrived as children. Others had grown old beside these same fires. The kitchen had become more than a workplace. It had become its own small family. Above their heads, bundles of garlic, onions, and herbs hung from thick oak beams. The morning sunlight now slipped through the high windows, painting soft golden patterns across worn stone floors polished smooth by countless footsteps. Dust floated peacefully through the narrow beams of light. Outside, the first castle bell echoed across the courtyard. Its deep voice rolled gently through towers, workshops, gardens, and stables. The castle was awake. Soon footsteps multiplied beyond the kitchen walls. Servants crossed the courtyard carrying baskets. A stable boy hurried toward the well. A gardener pushed open the gate leading into the herb garden. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rang softly for the first time that morning. Life spread through the castle one gentle sound at a time. Back inside the kitchen, the baker approached the great oven once again. He opened its heavy wooden door. A wave of warm air rolled gently across the room. Inside, the first loaves had transformed beautifully. Their crusts had turned a rich golden brown. Tiny cracks had opened naturally across each rounded top. The baker lifted one loaf carefully. He tapped its underside with his knuckles. A deep, hollow sound answered. Perfect. The smell of fresh bread drifted slowly through the kitchen. Every conversation paused. Every face seemed to brighten. Even after centuries, there are few aromas more comforting than bread just lifted from the oven. The master cook breathed deeply. Now, he said quietly, the castle is truly awake. And as sunlight finally reached the ancient stone walls outside, another peaceful medieval day had only just begun. The rich aroma of freshly baked bread lingered gently beneath the high stone ceiling. For a few peaceful moments, the entire kitchen seemed to breathe together. Fresh loaves rested upon wide wooden racks, their golden crusts quietly cooling in the soft morning air. Wisps of steam escaped through tiny cracks, carrying the comforting scent of warm wheat, toasted grain, and oak-fired ovens. One young apprentice found it almost impossible not to stare. Every morning felt a little magical. Only a short while earlier, these loaves had been little more than flour, water, salt, and patience. Now they had become the first meal that would nourish nearly everyone inside the castle walls. The master baker picked up a single loaf and placed it into the apprentice's hands. "Feel its weight." The boy did. It was heavier than he expected. "The crust should be firm," the baker explained quietly, "but the heart should remain soft." He gently pressed the loaf. It yielded slightly beneath his fingers before slowly returning to its shape. The baker smiled. "It will keep someone warm today." Those simple words revealed something important. Bread was never only food. It represented comfort, security, routine, hope. For many ordinary people across medieval England, a good loaf of bread meant the difference between ending the day satisfied or still feeling the quiet ache of hunger. Nearby, the great cauldron of pottage continued its slow, patient simmer. Tiny bubbles rose lazily to the surface before disappearing once more beneath fragrant vegetables and barley. The master cook stirred the mixture with long, steady circles. No one rushed him. Pottage rewarded patience. Each passing minute allowed the vegetables to soften, the barley to swell, and the herbs to gently share their fragrance with the broth. A kitchen maid approached carrying a small clay bowl. She dipped it carefully into the pot. Steam curled upward. She waited a moment before tasting a single spoonful. Her eyes closed thoughtfully. "A little more time." The master cook nodded. Without speaking, another apprentice crossed the room toward bundles of drying herbs suspended from thick oak beams. He selected only a few fresh sprigs. Too much would overpower the vegetables. Too little would leave the broth unfinished. He rubbed the leaves gently between his palms before sprinkling them into the simmering pottage. The fragrance changed almost instantly. It became warmer, rounder, more welcoming. One of the younger boys breathed deeply. "I never knew herbs could smell different after touching them." The elderly kitchen maid smiled. "They like to wake up too." Soft laughter drifted across the room before fading naturally into the steady rhythm of work. No voice ever became loud. The kitchen possessed its own quiet language. Wooden bowls resting upon heavy tables. Iron knives tapping gently against chopping boards. Water poured into clay pitchers. Bread cooling upon woven baskets. The slow crackle of oak logs settling inside the great hearth. Even these ordinary sounds created a peaceful melody that filled the ancient room. Outside, sunlight finally reached the highest towers of the castle. Golden light spilled slowly down rough limestone walls before stretching across the courtyard below. Stable doors now stood fully open. A pair of horses quietly lowered their heads into fresh hay. Near the well, servants formed a short line, patiently filling wooden buckets that would soon travel throughout the castle. Farther away, the castle gardener knelt among neat rows of herbs. Mint, sage, parsley, chives. The leaves still shimmered with tiny drops of morning dew. Many people imagined medieval castles as places of endless feasts. In truth, most meals were remarkably practical. The castle's cooks understood that nourishing hundreds of people every day depended less upon luxury than careful planning. Nothing useful could be wasted. Yesterday's bread became thick slices for soup. Vegetable peelings sometimes flavored broths. Bones simmered slowly to create rich stock. Every onion, every carrot, every handful of grain carried value. Waste belonged to no one's kitchen. Near the pantry door, 2 servants carefully counted wheels of hard cheese resting upon broad wooden shelves. Beside them stood barrels of salted herring, smoked bacon, dried peas, oats, and sacks of beans gathered after the previous autumn harvest. The cool stone pantry remained one of the quietest places inside the castle. Its thick walls protected precious food from summer heat while allowing supplies to last through long winters. The master cook entered briefly, carrying a small wax tablet. He quietly noted how much bread had already been baked, how many onions remained, how many eggs had arrived that morning. These simple records helped tomorrow's kitchen begin long before tomorrow ever arrived. Outside the pantry window, swallows darted effortlessly through the brightening sky. Their cheerful songs drifted softly into the room. For just a moment, everyone seemed to pause. Even the busiest kitchens sometimes stopped to notice the beauty of an ordinary morning. The baker carried another tray of warm loaves toward the serving tables. Sunlight caught their golden crusts until they almost seemed to glow. A young kitchen boy looked at them with quiet admiration. "Do you ever become tired of baking bread?" The baker considered the question carefully. Then he smiled. "No, because every sunrise deserves fresh bread." No grand speech followed. None was needed. Those few words settled gently into the peaceful atmosphere like flour upon an old wooden table. Outside, the castle had fully awakened. Messengers crossed the courtyard. Children laughed somewhere near the chapel garden. The blacksmith's hammer rang steadily from beyond the outer wall. A flock of pigeons circled above the tallest tower before settling upon warm stone rooftops. Inside the kitchen, however, the rhythm remained calm, measured, unhurried, just as it had yesterday, just as it would tomorrow. And as another basket of warm bread disappeared toward the great hall, the comforting heart of the castle continued beating quietly. One loaf, one bowl, and one gentle morning at a time. One by one, baskets of warm bread disappeared through the great kitchen doorway. The day had fully arrived. Soft golden sunlight now stretched across the castle courtyard, warming the cool stone that had rested beneath the night's gentle chill. Dew still sparkled upon patches of grass near the inner walls, though each passing ray slowly invited the tiny droplets to disappear into the morning air. Inside the kitchen, the peaceful rhythm continued without interruption. Nothing felt hurried. Even with hundreds of people waiting to be fed, every movement carried the confidence of long practice. The master cook stood beside the great cauldron once more. The pottage had thickened beautifully. Barley had softened until each grain blended naturally into the rich broth. Carrots and turnips had surrendered their firmness, while onions had nearly melted away, leaving only their gentle sweetness behind. He lifted the long wooden paddle. The surface rolled slowly beneath it. Steam drifted upward in graceful ribbons, carrying the comforting fragrance of fresh herbs, slow-cooked vegetables, and warm grain throughout the room. One apprentice smiled quietly. "It smells even better now." The master cook nodded. "Most good things simply need time." Nearby, 2 kitchen maids arranged rows of sturdy wooden bowls across a long oak table. Every bowl had been carved by hand. Some carried tiny imperfections, a slightly uneven rim, a darker knot in the wood, a faint mark left by years of careful use. None were identical, yet together they reflected the quiet beauty of everyday craftsmanship. Another servant placed fresh loaves beside each basket. Some were dark rye bread for the castle workers. Others, made with finer wheat flour, would later travel toward the Lord's household. No loaf appeared wasteful or extravagant. Each represented careful labor stretching back many months, to fields planted in autumn, harvests gathered beneath late summer skies, grain slowly milled beside peaceful rivers, and finally transformed here by patient hands. The heavy kitchen door opened again. This time several young servants entered carrying large wooden trays. Soon they would deliver breakfast throughout the castle. Some trays would travel toward the guards stationed upon the walls. Others would reach the stable workers already tending horses. Several would continue toward craftsmen repairing roofs, sharpening tools, and maintaining the great stone fortress itself. The castle functioned almost like a living village enclosed within protective walls. Each person depended quietly upon another. The baker depended upon the miller. The miller depended upon the farmer. The farmer depended upon the seasons. And everyone depended upon the cooks who transformed simple harvests into nourishing meals. Near the pantry, an older servant carefully sliced generous pieces of fresh cheese. The pale wheels had been made from sheep's milk only weeks earlier. Their smooth surfaces carried the faint aroma of fresh cream and meadow grasses. Beside them rested small jars of honey gathered during the previous summer. Golden and thick, the honey caught the morning sunlight as though tiny pieces of the rising sun had been stored safely inside clay pots. Not every breakfast included honey. It remained a welcome luxury. Still, today a small portion would accompany the Lord's table. Elsewhere in the kitchen, apples harvested the previous autumn rested inside broad wicker baskets. Though many months had passed, careful storage inside cool stone cellars had preserved them remarkably well. Some carried tiny wrinkles upon their skins. Others remained firm and bright. Nothing perfect, everything useful. One young kitchen boy selected the finest apples with great care. His task seemed simple, yet even this small responsibility mattered. A careless choice could disappoint an honored guest. A thoughtful one quietly honored the work of every orchard keeper who had tended those trees. Across the room, a pair of servants folded clean linen cloths over baskets of bread. The cloth helped keep warmth inside as breakfast made its slow journey across the castle. Warm bread always reached the tables before cold bread. That simple habit had survived countless generations. Outside, the castle bell rang again. Its deep voice rolled across towers, workshops, gardens, and distant fields beyond the walls. Morning prayers had ended. Daily work now truly began. The courtyard gradually filled with gentle activity. A co-opper rolled an unfinished barrel toward his workshop. The castle carpenter balanced freshly cut oak planks across one shoulder. Several children followed their mother toward the laundry yard carrying neatly folded garments. A flock of white geese waddled confidently across the open space as though the entire castle belonged to them. No one seemed eager to disturb their peaceful march. From the kitchen doorway, the master cook watched these familiar scenes for only a moment. He had witnessed thousands of mornings just like this, yet none felt ordinary. Every sunrise brought another chance to feed hungry people, another opportunity to care quietly for others. He often believed cooking had less to do with recipes than kindness. The finest meals were not always the richest. Sometimes they were simply warm enough to comfort tired hands after long hours of work. Sometimes they reminded someone of home. Sometimes they carried familiar smells that reached memories long forgotten. Returning inside, he picked up a fresh loaf from the cooling rack. Its crust crackled softly beneath gentle pressure. With one practiced motion, he sliced it open. A cloud of fragrant steam escaped into the warm kitchen. The soft interior glowed pale gold in the morning light. The apprentices instinctively gathered closer. The master cook smiled. "Every day begins with bread," he said quietly. "And perhaps every good day begins with sharing it." Outside, another gentle breeze stirred the castle banners high above the towers. Inside, bowls were filled. Bread was passed from hand to hand. The first breakfast trays disappeared into quiet stone corridors. And deep within the castle's warm heart, another peaceful morning unfolded exactly as it had for generations. One simple meal, one kind gesture, and one shared loaf at a time. The last breakfast tray disappeared into the long stone corridor, its wooden footsteps gradually fading into the distance. For a brief moment, the great kitchen grew surprisingly quiet again, not silent. A medieval castle was never truly silent. The fire still whispered inside the enormous hearth. Water continued to simmer gently inside the great copper kettle. Fresh bread cooled upon wooden racks with tiny crackling sounds as their golden crusts settled into place. Someone quietly swept scattered flour from beneath the baking table. Another apprentice carefully polished an iron ladle before hanging it back upon its familiar wooden peg. The morning meal had been served, but the day's work had only just begun. The master cook untied his linen apron and folded it neatly across a nearby bench. "Come," he said softly to the youngest apprentice. "We have something important to visit." The boy looked around the busy kitchen. "The pantry?" The old cook smiled. "Even more important." Together they stepped through a small oak door tucked beside the rear wall of the kitchen. Instantly the air changed. Inside the kitchen, warmth from the great fireplaces wrapped everything in comforting heat. Outside, cool morning air greeted them with gentle freshness. A soft breeze carried the fragrance of damp earth still resting beneath the night's dew. Birdsong floated from nearby trees. Somewhere high above, swallows circled effortlessly around the castle towers before disappearing into the bright blue sky. Stone pathways led through a peaceful courtyard hidden behind the kitchen buildings. Few visitors ever saw this quiet corner of the castle. Most noble guests admired the impressive gatehouse, the soaring great hall, or the colorful banners flying above the towers. Yet this humble garden quietly served every meal prepared within the castle. It asked for no admiration, only care. Rows of raised wooden beds stretched across the rich soil. Each had been planted with remarkable order. Nothing appeared random. Every herb grew exactly where years of careful experience suggested it should. The apprentice slowed his steps. He had walked through this garden many times before. Still, every visit seemed to reveal something new. Morning sunlight rested gently upon tiny drops of dew clinging to countless green leaves. Each droplet reflected miniature worlds of blue sky and warm golden light. The master cook knelt beside the first garden bed. "This," he said quietly, touching a cluster of soft green leaves, "is parsley." The apprentice smiled. "I know parsley." The older man chuckled. "You know its name." He gently rubbed a leaf between his fingers before inviting the boy to smell it. Immediately, a fresh, clean fragrance filled the cool morning air. "It wakes a soup without shouting." The apprentice laughed softly. "I've never heard anyone describe herbs like that." "Then perhaps you've never listened to them. The old cook stood once more. They continued slowly along the narrow path. Nearby grew thick clusters of sage. Their broad gray-green leaves felt almost like soft wool beneath careful fingers. "Sage," the cook explained, "likes roasted meat." Farther along stood rosemary bushes reaching almost to the apprentice's waist. Tiny blue flowers still lingered among their fragrant branches. "When winter arrives," the master cook said, "rosemary reminds people that summer once existed." The apprentice paused thoughtfully. "Can herbs remember seasons?" The older man smiled. "Perhaps people remember seasons because of herbs." Neither hurried to answer. Some questions belonged more to quiet reflection than certain replies. Honeybees drifted peacefully from flower to flower. Their gentle humming blended with bird song until the entire garden seemed filled with soft music. No loud voices, no clanging pots, no shouting servants, only nature moving at its own patient rhythm. Near a low stone wall grew neat rows of thyme. The plants hugged the earth closely, releasing tiny bursts of warm fragrance whenever touched by the breeze. The apprentice knelt carefully. "I never realized something so small could smell so wonderful." The master cook nodded. "History often remembers great castles." He looked toward the towering walls rising beyond the garden. But castles stood because of little things. He gently touched the thyme. A handful of herbs, a loaf of bread, a bucket of water, a patient pair of hands. The apprentice quietly considered those words. Inside the castle, hundreds of people depended upon meals prepared every single day. Yet every meal began somewhere much quieter than the great kitchen. It began here, among sunlight, fresh soil, morning dew, and growing herbs. Beyond the herb beds stretched a small orchard enclosed by low stone walls. Apple trees spread their branches gently overhead. Tiny green fruit had only recently begun forming. Many weeks would pass before harvest. The old cook rested one hand upon the rough bark of an ancient tree. "I planted this one when I was younger than you." The apprentice looked up in surprise. It was only this tall. He held his hand barely above his knee. "And now look." The branches sheltered birds building tiny nests among fresh leaves. Sunlight danced across the grass beneath. A gentle breeze carried the faint sweetness of apple blossoms lingering from earlier in the season. The apprentice smiled. "So one day someone else will stand beneath it." "I hope so," the old cook replied. "Cooking feeds people today. Planting feeds people tomorrow." Those simple words settled peacefully into the quiet morning. Nearby, an elderly gardener slowly approached pushing a small wooden cart. Bundles of freshly gathered chives rested beside baskets of mint and bunches of fragrant dill. His broad straw hat shaded a weathered face made kind by many years beneath the sun. He greeted the cook with a cheerful smile. "The parsley is growing beautifully this year." The cook examined the healthy rows with quiet satisfaction. "The spring rains were generous, and your careful hands helped." The gardener laughed gently. "The rain deserves more credit than I do." Together they walked slowly through the remaining garden, discussing which herbs would soon be ready for harvest and which needed another week beneath the summer sun. No one hurried the conversation. Like everything else inside the castle, the garden followed nature's own unchanging calendar. There was no faster path, only the right season, only the right moment, and only the quiet understanding that the finest meals often began long before anyone entered the kitchen. By the time the sun had climbed a little higher above the eastern hills, the busiest rush of breakfast had gently passed. The great kitchen no longer echoed with the steady stream of servants collecting bowls and baskets. Instead, a calmer rhythm settled over the room. Empty wooden platters returned to their places. Copper pots simmered quietly over beds of glowing oak embers. Fresh loaves continued cooling upon wide wooden racks, while the comforting fragrance of warm bread lingered beneath the high stone ceiling. The master cook wiped his hands upon his linen apron before lifting a heavy iron key from a hook beside the fireplace. "There is another room every good cook must know," he said softly. The youngest apprentice followed him through a narrow stone passage hidden behind the kitchen wall. The corridor felt noticeably cooler. The warm breath of the ovens quickly faded behind them, replaced by the fresh scent of limestone, dry timber, and the faint, earthy aroma of the castle itself. After several quiet steps, they stopped before a thick oak door reinforced with black iron bands. The master cook turned the heavy key. The lock clicked with a deep, familiar sound. Slowly, the door swung inward. Cool air drifted gently across their faces. Inside lay one of the castle's greatest treasures. Not gold, not silver, not jeweled crowns. Food. The pantry stretched farther than the apprentice had remembered. Stone shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, carefully arranged with baskets, barrels, clay jars, wooden chests, and woven sacks. Everything rested in perfect order. Nothing had been placed carelessly. Generations of careful planning had taught castle kitchens that a well-organized pantry could mean the difference between comfort and hardship during the long winter months. Sunlight entered only through two narrow windows cut high into the thick stone wall. Their soft beams painted golden stripes across the cool floor. Dust drifted lazily through the light, moving so slowly that it almost seemed suspended in time. The apprentice breathed deeply. It smelled unlike any other room in the castle. Dry herbs, fresh apples, oak barrels, honey, smoked meat, cheese, grain. Every season of the year seemed quietly preserved within these stone walls. The master cook walked toward a row of broad wooden barrels. He rested one weathered hand upon the nearest lid. "Salted pork," he explained. He moved to the next. "Salted beef." Another. "Pickled cabbage." Then another. "Dried peas." Every barrel carried a carefully carved wooden marker identifying its contents. Nothing relied upon memory alone. Even experienced cooks respected careful records. Farther along, the shelves rested dozens of large wheels of cheese. Some had aged only a few weeks. Others had quietly matured for many months beneath the cool air of the pantry. Their pale rinds carried tiny natural cracks that spoke of slow, patient aging. The apprentice gently touched one. "It feels like stone." The master cook smiled. "Until you cut it." Nearby stood shelves filled with clay jars sealed carefully beneath cloth and wax. Inside rested precious honey gathered from the castle's own hives, amber-colored apple preserves, blackberry syrup, rendered goose fat, fragrant herb oils. Each jar represented hours of careful work performed months before. Summer always prepared for winter. Nothing was wasted. At the center of the room stood enormous linen sacks filled with grain. Wheat, barley, oats, rye. Each sack rested upon raised wooden platforms to protect it from damp stone floors. The master cook loosened one drawstring and scooped a handful of wheat into his palm. Golden kernels slipped slowly between his fingers. "Each one," he said quietly, "is a promise." The apprentice looked puzzled. "A promise?" "A promise that tomorrow's bread can still be baked." Silence settled comfortably between them. The words needed no further explanation. Beyond the grain stood rows of woven baskets overflowing with onions, garlic, and turnips. Bundles of dried herbs hung from ceiling beams, their gentle fragrance filling the cool air. Strings of onions dangled beside clusters of garlic, casting soft shadows upon the stone walls. Nothing appeared decorative. Everything served a purpose. And yet, together, they created a quiet beauty all their own. The apprentice noticed a small wooden chest tucked beneath one shelf. Unlike the larger storage boxes, this one carried an iron lock. "What is inside?" The master cook unlocked it carefully. Within rested several tiny cloth pouches. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. The rich aromas escaped into the cool pantry the moment the lid opened. The apprentice smiled in amazement. "They smell so different. They have traveled farther than anyone in this castle." The old cook lifted one small pouch of cinnamon. "It crossed deserts." He picked up another. This pepper sailed across distant seas. Then he gently returned each pouch to its place. "We use them carefully. A single pinch can change an entire meal." The apprentice nodded with new appreciation. He realized that even the smallest ingredients carried remarkable journeys hidden within them. The pantry was more than a storage room. It was a quiet map of the medieval world. Nearby villages supplied vegetables. Local forests provided mushrooms and honey. Monastery gardens shared medicinal herbs. Distant merchants brought rare spices from lands most castle servants would never see. All those journeys quietly ended here, inside one peaceful stone room. The master cook closed the spice chest and smiled. "Come," he said gently. "There is still much of the castle waiting to show us its stories." The heavy lid of the spice chest closed with a gentle wooden thud. For a moment, neither the master cook nor the apprentice spoke. The cool pantry seemed to invite silence. It was the kind of place where hurried footsteps felt out of place. Even voices naturally softened beneath the thick stone ceiling, as though the walls themselves wished to protect the quiet treasures stored within. The master cook walked slowly toward the far end of the pantry. "This room feeds today," he said in a calm voice, "but it also protects tomorrow." The apprentice followed, noticing details he had never truly seen before. Every shelf carried a purpose. Every basket rested slightly above the floor upon wooden slats to allow fresh air to move beneath. Clay jars never touched damp stone directly. Barrels stood with tiny spaces between them so moisture could not gather. Nothing had been arranged by chance. Centuries of experience had quietly taught countless cooks the best ways to preserve food. The old cook stopped beside a row of hanging hams. Their rich brown surfaces glowed softly beneath the narrow shafts of sunlight entering through the high windows. Thin wisps of oak smoke still clung faintly to them. "These have been smoking for many weeks," he explained. "The smoke keeps them safe." The apprentice looked closely. "They hardly look fresh." "They are not meant to." The master cook smiled kindly. "They are meant to last." He gently touched one of the hams. Winter asks different questions than summer. During the warm months, gardens overflowed with fresh vegetables. Milk arrived daily. Herbs grew almost faster than anyone could gather them. Fish could be caught from nearby rivers. Fruit slowly ripened beneath warm sunshine. But winter changed everything. Snow covered the fields. The rivers sometimes froze along their edges. Travel became slower. Fresh vegetables grew scarce. The castle survived those quiet months because people spent the rest of the year preparing for them. Nothing valuable was ever taken for granted. Nearby stood several enormous crocks filled with pickled vegetables. The master cook carefully lifted one heavy lid. A pleasant, slightly sharp aroma drifted into the cool air. Inside floated pale cabbages, carrots, onions, and cucumbers preserved beneath salted brine. The apprentice wrinkled his nose for only a second. The old cook laughed softly. "You'll learn to enjoy that smell. It means the vegetables are still waiting patiently for winter." A little farther along the wall stood dozens of woven baskets suspended from sturdy wooden hooks. Inside rested strings of dried apples, pears, plums, even small bunches of grapes carefully transformed into raisins. Months earlier they had been fresh from nearby orchards. Now they had become something entirely different, sweeter, lighter, able to remain useful long after autumn leaves had fallen. The apprentice picked up a single dried apple slice. It felt firm but slightly flexible beneath his fingers. "May I?" The master cook nodded. The young boy tasted it slowly. Its sweetness surprised him. Not bright like fresh fruit, gentler, warmer, almost carrying the memory of summer sunshine inside every bite. The master cook smiled as he watched. Sometimes preserved food carries memories as well as nourishment. Outside the small pantry window, sunlight had climbed higher across the castle walls. The sounds of daily life drifted faintly inside. The steady ring of the blacksmith's hammer echoed from the outer courtyard. A horse snorted contentedly from the nearby stable. Children laughed somewhere beyond the chapel garden. Several pigeons fluttered across the rooftops before settling once again upon the warm stone battlements. The castle was fully awake now, yet inside the pantry, time still moved gently. Near another shelf rested several small linen bags tied with blue wool thread. The apprentice pointed toward them. "What are those?" "Seeds." "For planting?" "Yes." The master cook untied one carefully. Inside rested tiny dried beans saved from last year's harvest. "Not every bean becomes supper." He poured a few into the apprentice's palm. "Some become next year's harvest." The apprentice rolled the smooth beans between his fingers. "So the pantry protects gardens too." The old cook nodded. "And the gardens protect the pantry." The two smiled at the simple truth. Everything depended upon everything else. The fields relied upon good weather. The kitchens relied upon the fields. The people relied upon the kitchens. And each passing season quietly prepared for the next. Before leaving, the master cook paused beside a large parchment hanging near the doorway. Unlike royal proclamations decorated with elegant lettering, this document was plain and practical. Small charcoal marks recorded supplies remaining after each week. How many sacks of barley? How many wheels of cheese? How much honey? How many barrels of salted fish? Each careful mark represented responsibility rather than wealth. The apprentice studied the list with growing admiration. So much work happens before anyone even sits down to eat. The master cook rested a gentle hand upon the boy's shoulder. "The finest meals begin long before the fire is lit." He reached for the heavy iron key once more. Together they stepped back into the narrow stone passage. The warmth of the kitchen slowly returned with every step. Soon the comforting smell of fresh bread welcomed them once again. Inside, the afternoon preparations had already begun. One cook kneaded another batch of dough for tomorrow morning. A kitchen maid carefully chopped fresh leeks beside the window where sunlight filled the room. The great cauldron no longer held breakfast pottage. Now it simmered quietly with a rich vegetable broth that would become the evening meal. Nothing inside the castle kitchen truly ended. One task simply flowed into the next. One meal gently prepared for another. One season quietly planned for the next. And at the heart of it all stood ordinary people whose patient hands kept the great castle alive, day after peaceful day, beneath the steady rhythm of crackling fires, warm bread, and the timeless comfort of shared meals. The warmth of the kitchen faded gently behind them as the master cook lifted a large wicker basket filled with fresh bread. The loaves had cooled just enough to be carried. Their golden crusts still released the comforting aroma of roasted grain and oak-fired ovens, filling the narrow stone passage with a quiet sense of home. The apprentice reached for another basket. It was heavier than it appeared. Fresh bread always carried a pleasant weight, as though each loaf held not only flour and water, but also the patient work of countless hands stretching back through every season. "Walk carefully," the master cook said with a warm smile. "The bread has already survived the oven. It would be a shame to lose it on the stairs." The boy smiled. "I'll be careful." Together they climbed a broad staircase worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Each stone step dipped slightly in the center, polished by centuries of servants, guards, noble guests, wandering monks, traveling merchants, and children running errands through the castle. The walls felt cool beneath the fingertips. Tiny patches of green moss clung to the outer stones where morning moisture lingered after the night's cool air. Narrow windows overlooked the inner courtyard. From one opening, the apprentice paused for just a heartbeat. Below, life continued unfolding at its gentle pace. A stable hand brushed the coat of a chestnut horse until it gleamed beneath the growing sunlight. Two washerwomen laughed quietly while hanging freshly washed linen across long ropes stretched between wooden posts. Near the well, a line of servants patiently filled buckets that reflected the brilliant blue summer sky. The castle seemed enormous, yet every corner depended upon ordinary routines quietly repeated each day. The master cook continued forward. The hall will soon be busy. The apprentice hurried to catch up. They entered a long gallery connecting the kitchen wing to the heart of the castle. Colorful woven tapestries covered much of the stone walls. Unlike modern paintings displayed simply for decoration, these heavy fabrics served another purpose. They helped hold warmth inside during cold weather. They softened echoes. They made large stone rooms feel more welcoming. The apprentice slowed beside one tapestry. It showed a peaceful hunting scene. Not a dramatic chase. Instead, a noble family quietly riding through green woodland beneath tall oak trees. Birds rested upon branches. Dogs walked calmly beside the horses. Everything appeared surprisingly peaceful. The master cook noticed. People often think castles were always preparing for war. He smiled softly, but most days were wonderfully ordinary. They continued toward two enormous oak doors reinforced with black iron hinges. One servant already stood waiting. With a respectful nod, he pulled both doors open. The great hall stretched before them. Even after many visits, the apprentice always felt a quiet sense of wonder. Sunlight poured through tall windows high upon the southern wall. Golden beams crossed the polished stone floor before resting upon rows of sturdy oak tables arranged with remarkable order. Everything had already been prepared. Fresh linen cloths covered the high table where the lord's family would later dine. Simple wooden tables filled the rest of the hall for officers, honored guests, and senior household servants. Rushes mixed with fragrant lavender covered portions of the floor, releasing a faint herbal scent whenever someone walked across them. The air smelled pleasantly of beeswax polish, fresh timber, warm bread, and the lingering smoke from yesterday's fire still resting quietly within the great hearth. Above, thick oak beams disappeared into the shadowed ceiling. Colorful banners bearing the family's heraldic symbols hung peacefully between carved wooden supports. Yet despite its size, the hall did not feel grand in an overwhelming way. It felt lived in, comfortable, welcoming. The master cook placed his basket upon one long table. Immediately, several hall servants stepped forward. Each knew exactly where every loaf belonged. No instructions were necessary. One servant arranged bread baskets evenly along the tables. Another carefully placed small dishes of fresh butter near the high table. A third polished silver cups until they reflected sunlight like tiny pools of gold. The apprentice watched with quiet admiration. "It feels almost like everyone knows the same dance." The master cook smiled. "A good castle moves that way. Without rushing, without shouting, everyone understood their part." Near the great fireplace, an elderly steward carefully examined each table. His dark wool robe remained simple despite his important position. Around his waist hung a ring of heavy iron keys that softly chimed together whenever he walked. He noticed the fresh bread immediately. "The baker has outdone himself today." The master cook inclined his head modestly. The wheat was excellent this season. The steward gently pressed one loaf with experienced fingers. Its crust crackled softly. Perfect. Nearby, sunlight illuminated floating dust that drifted lazily through the hall like tiny golden stars. Outside the tall windows, swallows darted effortlessly through the bright summer sky. Their cheerful calls occasionally echoed faintly inside before disappearing once again into the peaceful countryside. The apprentice walked toward one of the windows. Beyond the castle walls stretched fields of barley moving gently beneath the breeze. Farther away, sheep wandered across green hills, watched patiently by a lone shepherd resting upon his wooden staff. Thin columns of smoke rose from scattered village cottages where ordinary families continued preparing their own midday meals. The entire landscape seemed wrapped in calm. It was easy to forget that history often remembered kings and battles. Standing here, another truth quietly revealed itself. Most people spent their lives baking bread, repairing roofs, growing herbs, tending sheep, drawing water, sweeping floors, sharing simple meals with family and neighbors. Those quiet moments rarely appeared in grand chronicles, yet they filled almost every ordinary day. A church bell drifted softly across the valley. Its slow, deep tone rolled through the open countryside before reaching the castle walls. Everyone inside the hall paused for only a heartbeat, not because they had forgotten their work, but because the familiar sound gently marked the passing of another peaceful hour. The steward smiled. "Before long," he said quietly, "this hall will be filled with conversation." The master cook looked across the neatly arranged tables. "And before evening," he smiled warmly, "it will become quiet again." The apprentice looked around the sunlit hall one last time. He realized that every room inside the castle carried its own rhythm. The kitchen breathed with fire. The pantry breathed with patience. The herb garden breathed with the seasons. And the great hall breathed with people, with shared meals, with familiar voices, and with countless ordinary moments that quietly became history. By the time the church bell's gentle echo faded across the valley, the great hall had begun to fill with quiet life. Servants carried wooden trenchers from table to table with calm confidence. Fresh bread disappeared into waiting baskets. Clay pitchers of small ale and cool spring water caught the sunlight pouring through the tall windows, their smooth surfaces glowing softly against the polished oak tables. The master cook looked around with quiet satisfaction. Everything was ready. Nothing had been forgotten. He rested one weathered hand upon the apprentice's shoulder. "There is one more place every castle depends upon," he said. The apprentice smiled. "The bakery?" The old man chuckled. "We have already visited the bakery. The pantry? We've been there too." The boy thought for another moment. "The gardens?" The cook gently shook his head. "The place that keeps every other place alive." Together they left the great hall, walking through another stone corridor where narrow windows allowed ribbons of warm summer light to stretch across the ancient floor. The castle had grown livelier since sunrise. Messengers passed quietly, carrying rolled parchments tied with red cord. A carpenter balanced freshly shaped oak beams upon one shoulder. 2 young pages hurried toward the Lord's chambers, carefully carrying folded linen garments that smelled faintly of lavender. Every hallway carried its own quiet purpose. No one appeared rushed, yet everyone had somewhere to be. Soon they stepped into the bright courtyard once again. The morning air felt pleasantly warmer now. Sunlight rested upon every tower, every stone wall, and every timber roof. White clouds drifted lazily across the deep blue sky. Swallows darted overhead with effortless grace, occasionally swooping low enough that their tiny shadows danced across the cobblestones before vanishing once again. At the very center of the courtyard stood the castle well. It was not grand. It carried no carved statues or colorful banners. Instead, a sturdy circular wall of smooth limestone surrounded the deep shaft below. Above it stood a heavy oak frame supporting a broad wooden wheel wrapped with thick hemp rope. From the rope hung a strong iron-bound bucket polished smooth by years of careful hands. The apprentice slowed. "I've walked past this well every day," the master cook smiled. "And today you truly see it." Several servants already waited nearby with empty wooden pails resting beside their feet. No one seemed impatient. Each understood that everyone needed water. The kitchen, the stables, the laundry, the chapel, the workshops, even the gardens beyond the walls. One elderly water-bearer stepped forward. His shoulders remained broad despite his age, though countless years of carrying heavy buckets had left them slightly rounded. A simple brown tunic reached below his knees. A faded leather belt supported a small wooden cup carved from ash wood. His hands appeared strong enough to lift almost anything, yet his smile remained remarkably gentle. "Good morning, Master Cook. And to you, Thomas." The apprentice watched with curiosity as Thomas grasped the thick wooden handle connected to the great winding wheel. Slowly, steadily, the rope unwound into the darkness below. The bucket disappeared from sight. Only the soft creak of timber and the whisper of twisting hemp filled the quiet courtyard. After several peaceful moments, a distant splash echoed upward from deep within the well. Thomas waited. Then he began turning the wheel once again. This time it felt heavier. Water had weight. The bucket rose little by little. Droplets sparkled in the sunlight as it finally emerged from the darkness. Cool spring water shimmered inside, clear enough to reflect the bright summer sky above. The apprentice leaned closer. "I've never seen water so clear." Thomas smiled warmly. "Our spring comes from deep beneath the hill. It never forgets how to stay cold." The master cook dipped his fingers into the bucket. Even beneath the growing warmth of the morning, the water felt wonderfully cool. "Perfect," he said quietly. Thomas carefully filled one bucket after another. Some servants balanced wooden yokes across their shoulders, allowing 2 buckets to hang evenly from either side. Others pushed small hand carts fitted with sturdy barrels. No one spilled a drop unnecessarily. Every bucket represented effort. Every journey from the well mattered. The apprentice noticed faint grooves worn into the stone around the well's edge. How did those happen? Thomas rested one hand upon the smooth limestone. "Buckets? For how long?" The old water-bearer smiled toward the towering castle walls. "Longer than my grandfather could remember." The apprentice gently traced one of the shallow grooves with his fingertips. Generations of ropes had slowly shaped solid stone, not through force, but through quiet repetition, day after day, year after year. History often changed the same way, not always through great battles, sometimes through ordinary people repeating small acts with patience. Nearby, a young stable girl arrived carrying 2 empty pails. She greeted Thomas with a cheerful wave. "The horses have already finished the first barrels." Thomas laughed softly. "They always drink before the nights." The girl grinned. "I think they work harder." Even the master cook laughed. It was the sort of quiet joke that likely echoed through castle courtyards for generations. As another bucket rose from the well, sunlight caught thousands of tiny droplets falling back into the stone basin. Each sparkled for only a heartbeat before disappearing into the dust below. A pair of sparrows landed upon the well's edge. They waited patiently until everyone stepped aside before fluttering down to sip from a shallow puddle left beside the stones. No one disturbed them. They belonged here as much as anyone else. The master cook watched them for a moment. "Even the birds know where life begins." Thomas nodded. "So does every traveler. He pointed toward the great gatehouse where merchants, pilgrims, and wandering craftsmen often paused at the well before continuing their journeys. Long before they admired the castle walls, long before they entered the great hall, they first tasted its water. The apprentice looked once more into the deep, shadowed well. Far below, sunlight barely touched the quiet surface hidden within the darkness. Yet from that unseen spring flowed every loaf of bread, every bowl of pottage, every washed garment, every blooming herb, every healthy horse, and every peaceful day inside the castle. For a long moment, the three simply stood together beneath the warm summer sky, listening to the soft creak of the wooden wheel, the cheerful songs of swallows circling overhead, and the gentle sound of fresh water that had been faithfully serving the castle for generations. The sound of the well's great wooden wheel slowly faded behind them as the master cook and his young apprentice crossed the sunlit courtyard once again. The castle had entered the gentle rhythm of late morning. The busiest hours of breakfast had long passed, yet no corner of the fortress had become idle. Everywhere they looked, ordinary people continued their work with calm determination, each task quietly supporting another. A pair of stonemasons carefully replaced weathered blocks along the outer wall. Nearby, a co-opper tightened the iron hoops around a freshly built barrel with slow, measured strikes of his wooden mallet. From the blacksmith's forge came the familiar ring of hammer against glowing iron, softened by distance until it blended naturally with birdsong drifting above the castle roofs. The apprentice smiled. "It feels as though the whole castle breathes together." The master cook nodded. "It does, and every person helps it breathe." As they returned through the kitchen doorway, a comforting wave of warmth greeted them once again. The great hearth burned steadily. The flames no longer leaped as brightly as they had before sunrise. Instead, they settled into deep beds of glowing embers, producing the steady heat experienced cooks valued most. Large copper cauldrons now occupied nearly every corner of the enormous fireplace. Some simmered gently. Others waited patiently for fresh ingredients. The room smelled different now. Breakfast aromas had disappeared. In their place came the richer fragrance of onions slowly softening in butter, fresh herbs warming beside the fire, and a broth that had quietly deepened in flavor throughout the morning. The kitchen had entered its second chapter of the day. An elderly kitchen maid carefully peeled onions beside the window. Her small knife moved with remarkable confidence. The thin brown skin slipped away almost effortlessly, revealing smooth white layers beneath. The apprentice watched for a moment. "You make it look easy," she laughed softly. "I've peeled onions for longer than you've been alive." She placed another onion into a wooden bowl. "After enough years, your hands remember before your mind does." Nearby, two apprentices prepared carrots gathered from the castle gardens only hours earlier. Some were long, others short and twisted. None looked perfectly straight, yet each would soon become part of a nourishing meal. The master cook examined every basket with quiet satisfaction. Good vegetables never need to be beautiful. They only need to be honest. The apprentice repeated those words quietly, hoping to remember them. Near the great chopping table stood the castle butcher. His work had begun long before dawn. Fresh cuts of mutton rested upon broad oak boards beside neatly arranged joints of beef and several plump chickens prepared for roasting. Nothing appeared excessive. The castle rarely served extravagant feasts on ordinary days. Instead, meals reflected the season, the available harvest, and the needs of everyone living within the walls. The butcher sharpened his long knife upon a smooth whetstone. Its gentle scraping sound blended naturally with the quiet conversations filling the kitchen. He noticed the apprentice watching. "A sharp knife is a kind knife." The boy looked puzzled. The butcher smiled. "It works cleanly. It wastes less, and it respects the food placed before it. The master cook nodded in quiet agreement. Nothing inside the kitchen was treated carelessly. Not the bread, not the vegetables, not the meat. Every ingredient represented someone's labor, someone's patience, someone's season of work beneath the open sky. Along another table, several young servants carefully sorted bundles of herbs gathered that morning. Fresh thyme, parsley, sage, marjoram, mint. The room filled with their gentle fragrance as leaves were separated from stems and placed into small wooden bowls. One young girl rubbed a sprig of rosemary between her fingers before smiling. "It always reminds me of my mother's cottage." Another servant nodded. "My grandmother used to place rosemary beside the fire during winter." The apprentice listened quietly. It seemed every herb carried someone's memory. Every familiar smell quietly opened the door to another place. History often survived not only through written words, but through ordinary scents remembered across generations. At the center of the kitchen, the master cook gathered everyone together, not for a speech, simply to explain the afternoon's work. "We shall prepare vegetable pottage for the household, a roast for the high table, fresh bread for supper, apple tarts if time allows." No one complained. Each person immediately understood their task. There was comfort in familiar routines. One apprentice carried sacks of barley toward the grinding table. Another fetched clean water from the well. The older kitchen maid measured coarse salt into a small wooden bowl. The baker quietly checked another batch of dough rising beneath linen cloths. Outside, the summer sun continued climbing higher. Warm light entered through the high kitchen windows, falling across flour-dusted tables and polished copper pots until the room seemed almost golden. Dust floated peacefully through the beams of sunlight. The fire crackled gently. Wooden spoons stirred slowly. Iron lids lifted and settled again. No movement felt rushed. No voice became loud. The castle kitchen possessed its own steady heartbeat. One task flowed naturally into another. As the master cook stirred a fresh pot of broth, he paused for a moment. He invited the apprentice closer. "Taste." The boy carefully lifted a small wooden spoon. The broth remained simple. Leeks, carrots, onions, barley, fresh parsley, a little thyme. Nothing more, yet its warmth filled him with quiet comfort. "It's wonderful!" The old cook smiled. "It isn't finished." The apprentice looked surprised. "It already tastes complete." The master cook slowly stirred the pot once again. The best meals teach us patience. They become themselves little by little. The apprentice watched the steam curl gently upward. For the first time, he understood that cooking inside the castle was never about rushing toward the finished meal. It was about respecting every small moment along the way. Outside, another church bell echoed softly across the countryside. The afternoon had quietly begun, and within the warm stone walls of the great kitchen, ordinary people continued transforming simple harvests into comforting meals, just as countless generations had done before them. And just as countless generations would quietly continue to do long after this peaceful day had gently passed. The afternoon bell had long since faded into the distant countryside. Inside the castle kitchen, the slow rhythm of the day continued without interruption. Nothing hurried. Nothing stood still. The great hearth glowed with deep orange embers, their steady warmth filling the vast stone room with gentle comfort. The bright flames of morning had settled into a quieter fire, perfect for the long hours of slow cooking that carried the evening meal toward completion. The master cook stood before the largest copper cauldron. Steam drifted upward in graceful ribbons. He slowly stirred the rich pottage with the long ash-wood paddle, allowing every vegetable, grain, and herb to blend together naturally. "There is no secret," he said softly to the apprentice. "Only patience." The young boy nodded. Throughout the day, he had begun to understand that nearly every lesson inside the castle kitchen returned to the same simple truth. Bread required patience. Fire required patience. Gardens required patience. Even people needed patience with one another. Perhaps that was why the kitchen felt so peaceful. It moved at the same quiet pace as nature itself. Near the windows, the afternoon sunlight had become softer. Instead of the bright golden beams that filled the room before noon, the light now carried warm shades of amber, gently washing across worn oak tables polished smooth by generations of careful hands. Tiny specks of flour floated lazily through the sunlight. For a brief moment they looked almost like drifting snow. The elderly kitchen maid smiled as she watched them. "My grandmother used to say that flour dancing in the sunlight meant tomorrow's bread would be just as good." The apprentice looked upward. Did she truly believe that? The woman laughed quietly. "I think she simply enjoyed finding little reasons to smile. Sometimes traditions did not need to be true. Sometimes they simply made ordinary days feel warmer." Nearby, another batch of bread emerged from the great stone oven. The baker carefully lifted each loaf onto broad wooden cooling boards. The crusts crackled gently as cool air touched their warm surfaces. The familiar aroma spread through every corner of the kitchen. Fresh wheat, oak smoke, warm stone. For a few peaceful moments, nearly everyone paused to enjoy the fragrance. One servant closed her eyes. "It still smells exactly like my childhood." The baker smiled. "I hope it always does." Across the room, two apprentices prepared apples gathered from the castle orchard. Each fruit was washed carefully before being sliced with small iron knives. Their pale flesh slowly turned golden in the afternoon light. Soon they would be placed inside shallow pastry shells with a little honey and a gentle sprinkle of cinnamon reserved for special occasions. The apprentice watched the tiny pouch of cinnamon being opened once again. Its warm fragrance floated gently into the air. He smiled. "It smells like a distant country." The master cook nodded. "And today, a distant country has quietly joined our supper." History often connected people who never met. Farmers in English fields, merchants crossing the Mediterranean, sailors navigating unfamiliar seas, spice traders leading long camel caravans across deserts. Without realizing it, countless ordinary people worked together so that one peaceful castle kitchen could prepare a simple evening meal. Outside the open doorway, the courtyard had grown calmer. The hardest work of the day was nearly finished. The blacksmith allowed his forge to cool. Stable hands brushed the last of the horses before leading them toward fresh bedding of clean straw. Laundry hanging between wooden posts swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Children's laughter echoed briefly before fading as families gathered for supper. The castle itself seemed to slow its breathing. The master cook stepped outside for only a moment. From the kitchen doorway he watched long shadows stretch slowly across the courtyard stones. Above the western wall, the sun had begun its gentle descent. Its warm light painted the limestone towers in shades of honey and soft gold. A flock of pigeons circled the tallest turret before settling beneath the shelter of the old roof timbers. Far beyond the castle walls, fields shimmered beneath the evening breeze. Barley bent gently like waves upon a quiet sea. A shepherd guided his flock toward familiar pasture gates. Thin streams of chimney smoke rose from the nearby village as ordinary families prepared their own evening meals. For a moment, the master cook simply stood and admired the peaceful view. He had seen it thousands of times, yet it never became ordinary. Every sunset reminded him that another good day had quietly passed. Back inside, the great hall servants arrived carrying polished wooden trays. The evening meal was ready to be served. bowls of steaming pottage, freshly baked rye and wheat bread, roasted vegetables glazed lightly with herbs, slices of tender roasted mutton, fresh cheese, honey, apple tarts still warm from the oven. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasteful. Only honest food prepared with skill and quiet care. Each tray left the kitchen one after another. The apprentice helped carry his first full-serving tray toward the great hall. He walked carefully. The master cook noticed. "You've learned," the boy smiled. "I remembered what you said. The bread survived the oven. It should survive the hallway." Both laughed softly. As they entered the great hall once again, evening sunlight streamed through the high western windows. The long tables glowed warmly beneath the fading light. Candles had already been placed upon iron stands, though they remained unlit for the moment. Soon twilight would arrive. Conversation gradually filled the hall. Not loud, not hurried, simply the pleasant sound of people ending another day together. Servants exchanged quiet smiles. Guards removed heavy gloves before taking their places. Craftsmen rested tired hands after hours of honest work. The aroma of fresh bread drifted gently through the hall once more. The apprentice looked around. This morning these tables had waited in perfect silence. Now they welcomed life. He finally understood something the master cook had been teaching him since sunrise. A castle was not truly built from stone, nor timber, nor iron. It was built each day by ordinary people sharing ordinary moments with kindness, patience, and quiet purpose. Outside, the first evening star appeared above the darkening hills. Inside, candle flames soon flickered gently across polished wood and ancient stone. The long day inside the medieval castle slowly came to its peaceful close, and beneath the warm glow of firelight, surrounded by the comforting scent of bread, herbs, and oak smoke, another ordinary day quietly became another small piece of history. The final wooden tray returned quietly to the kitchen. Its bowls had been emptied. Its bread baskets held only a few scattered crumbs. The evening meal had come to a peaceful end. For a few moments, the great kitchen remained gently alive. Servants rinsed wooden trenchers in large tubs of cool spring water. Copper pots soaked quietly beside the great hearth, waiting to be cleaned before another sunrise. Someone swept the stone floor with a birch broom, gathering the day's last traces of flour beneath the long worktables. Nothing felt hurried. There would always be more work tomorrow. Tonight, however, the castle slowly allowed itself to rest. The master cook removed his linen apron and carefully folded it. The familiar cloth had accompanied him through countless ordinary days, just like this one. Each crease carried memories invisible to everyone else. Harvest feasts, cold winter evenings, spring celebrations, simple family suppers. Years had quietly settled into the fabric. The apprentice watched as the old man hung the apron on its wooden peg beside the great fireplace. "Is the day finally finished?" he asked. The master cook smiled. "The work is, but the castle is still awake." Together, they stepped outside into the courtyard. The warmth of the kitchen gave way to the cool embrace of evening air. Above them, the western sky still glowed with the last soft ribbons of amber and rose, while deep blue twilight slowly spread across the heavens. The first stars appeared one by one, not all at once, quietly, patiently, just as they had for countless generations. A gentle breeze stirred the banners atop the towers. Their quiet flutter blended with the distant call of an owl somewhere beyond the castle walls. The apprentice looked upward. "I don't think I've ever noticed so many stars." The master cook rested against the smooth stone of the well. "They've always been here. We simply remember to look when the day becomes quiet." For a while, neither of them spoke. The castle no longer echoed with busy footsteps. Most doors had closed. Lanterns glowed softly behind small leaded windows. Families gathered around modest evening fires. The blacksmith's forge stood dark. The stable horses shifted gently in fresh straw. Somewhere in the chapel, a single candle still burned beside a stone altar. Its tiny flame remained steady in the peaceful silence. From the village beyond the castle walls came the faint scent of wood smoke. It drifted upward through the cool night air before disappearing beneath the silver light of the rising moon. One by one, cottage windows grew dark. Children had already fallen asleep beneath wool blankets. Parents finished quiet conversations before banking the fire for the night. Even the sheep resting upon distant hills seemed little more than pale shapes beneath the moonlight. The castle itself appeared transformed. By day, its towers had stood proud against the summer sky. Now they became gentle silhouettes outlined in silver. Moonlight rested upon every stone, every rooftop, every narrow path, every quiet garden. The herb beds behind the kitchen shimmered beneath tiny drops of dew returning with the cool night air. Parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme. The same herbs gathered that morning now rested peacefully until another sunrise invited them back into the kitchen. The apple trees stood perfectly still. Their leaves whispered only when the breeze passed through. Far below the castle, the river reflected the moon like polished glass. Its gentle current continued flowing exactly as it had long before the castle was built, and exactly as it would long after everyone living here had become part of history. The apprentice leaned upon the stone wall overlooking the valley. "So many people worked today. They did, and tomorrow they'll do it all again." The master cook nodded. That is how a peaceful life is built, not through one great moment, but through thousands of quiet ones. Those simple words settled gently into the evening. Perhaps they were the greatest lesson of all. History often remembered kings. Chronicles recorded battles. Songs celebrated victories. Yet the true heartbeat of the medieval castle had never belonged only to its rulers. It belonged to the baker who rose before dawn, to the gardener patiently tending herbs, to the water-bearer drawing cool spring water, to the laundress hanging linen beneath the summer breeze, to the blacksmith shaping iron with careful hands, to the shepherd guiding sheep home at sunset, to the cook stirring soup beside a patient fire, and to every ordinary person whose quiet work allowed another peaceful day to unfold. The castle bell rang once. Its deep, gentle tone rolled across the sleeping countryside before fading into the night. No commands followed, no alarm answered, only silence returned. The master cook smiled. "Time for sleep," the apprentice nodded. Together they crossed the quiet courtyard. Their footsteps echoed softly across stones, polished smooth by centuries of ordinary lives. They passed the silent well, the resting kitchens, the darkened workshops, the chapel wrapped in candlelight. One by one, the lanterns were gently extinguished. Darkness never felt frightening here. It felt comforting, protective, like a warm blanket settling over the ancient walls. Above, the moon climbed higher. Its silver light touched every tower and every rooftop with remarkable gentleness. The stars seemed brighter now, the air cooler, the world slower, and somewhere beyond the castle walls, an owl called once more before all became still again. Tonight, dear friend, you have quietly wandered through a medieval castle, not during a famous battle or a royal celebration, but during something far rarer in history books, an ordinary day. You shared warm bread fresh from the oven, walked through fragrant herb gardens, visited cool stone pantries filled with careful preparations, drew clear spring water from the ancient well, listened to the quiet conversations of cooks, gardeners, servants, and craftsmen. watched the evening sun settle behind old stone towers. And now, beneath the same peaceful moon that has watched over countless generations, the castle finally sleeps. May its quiet rhythms remain with you. May the gentle crackle of the hearth, the scent of fresh bread, the whisper of summer leaves, and the calm voices of ordinary people drift softly through your dreams. Good night, dear friend, and whenever you wish, another forgotten corner of history will be waiting for you beneath the moonlight.